I know about all of these things, but why am I not doing these? You can definitely jump off a cliff, right?
Exactly.
Tell you the truth, I had never really thought about it. I had always just done it.
That's Jim Brass, a certified EOS implementer. And we're going to be diving into a whole bunch of things around entrepreneurship and leadership today. Welcome into the channel. My name is Tom. I'm the founder of Vertical Motion, where we help good people become great leaders. If that's interesting to you, there's a link down below to learn more about what we do. But today is a really special episode. We're going to be talking with a friend of mine, someone that has been introduced to me in the last year through a couple mutual contacts. And his name is Jim Brass. And I'm going to let Jim tell you about his story, but I'm excited for this. If you are ever interested in understanding how business leaders, entrepreneurs think, how they create systems and structures, this is the conversation for you. And this is a series of conversations that we're going to do. So Jim has been kind enough to do this a couple times. This one, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to come at entrepreneurship a little bit differently. And we're going to talk a little bit about our backgrounds, but then we're going to dive into what EOS is and what all that means. So with that all out of the way, please let me welcome to you, Mr. Jim Brass. Jim, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Tom. This is a lot of fun. I've been involved with Vertical Motion a couple of times now, and I think it's great what you guys are doing, helping those mid-career professionals to really grow and blossom into things. I see it all the time in my work, which is coaching leadership teams. So as you said, I'm a certified EOS implementer. And EOS means the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It comes from a book called Traction. You might have heard of it. There it is. And the way I got into it was I was an entrepreneur for many, many years and built a company that built very high-end home automation systems. It was a ton of fun, great fun to get into, and lots of challenges. But the biggest challenge that I ran into was really making my business work. So I got really deep into operational excellence, started getting better and better and better. And along the way, I learned about EOS and we implemented in our own company, and it had a lot of really great effect. So when it was time for me to exit that business and move on to my next thing, I decided that I was going to become an EOS implementer and help other entrepreneurs to create that operational excellence for themselves. And so I love the work that you guys are doing, and it all fits together so well. So thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you, Jim. This is fantastic. I'm excited to kind of dive in with you. Let me ask you first, before we dive into your background, EOS, and all of those things, let me just ask you kind of the same question that I ask everybody who jumps in on one of these podcasts with me. And that is, what does good leadership look like to you?
Yeah, it's changed over the years. And I think it's something that I had to learn, that now coaching leaders, I really realized that I had made a shift at one point. But it's all about being courageous or having courage in dealing with people from my standpoint. Because a lot of times we can be managers and we can be micromanagers, or we can not manage people very well or very much at all. And there's all flavors of that. But what all of that takes to really get in there and win the hearts and minds and get people moving in the right direction and keep them smiling and produce great results is having courage to actually be in the game and be with people. And that really, I think, is at the heart of leadership and how it works all around the team and around the company and all of those areas that we really need to get in there and lead.
I love that you said courage. I always tell my clients that it's better to be courageous than fearless. Mm-hmm. Being fearless, means that you don't feel the fear. Being courageous means you feel the fear and you do the thing anyway.
You can definitely jump off a cliff, right? And be one of those lemmings, but you're not thinking about it. Like the courage, you have to actually think about what you're doing and be intentional. And even when you don't want to do the thing, go into it anyway, knowing that it's the right thing to do. The fearlessness, maybe I think what you're talking about is that sometimes there's no intention in it. It's just literally about not having the fear, right?
Exactly. When I was younger, I would consider myself somewhat fearless. Now that I'm older and I have more to risk, more to lose, I still have to do things that are difficult, that I might have done without any thought earlier in life, and now I have to think about it. And that's why I really like the fearless versus courageous analogy.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your background. So you mentioned that you had gotten into entrepreneurship and you built your own business. Maybe tell the story about your entrepreneurial journey.
So yeah, it's funny. I've had to really think about this. When I started as an implementer, there was a big emphasis on what is your story as an entrepreneur, and to tell you the truth, I had never really thought about it. I had always just done it. I grew up at home. My mom had a bunch of businesses while I was growing up, and I started doing things, when I really look back at it, I started doing things from a very early age. I was all over the neighborhood selling services to everybody. And then that bloomed. I did a lot of music and electronics, and that bloomed into, I had a sound company for quite a while started when I was a teenager, doing audio for concerts or plays or whoever would hire me to do it, and supported myself like that for a while, and that which led into a career of doing audio, video, and home automation work. I started doing some really cool, big scale things, which wasn't necessarily something that somebody in their early 20s could go out and sell, right? I started working for companies and spent about 10 years really building up my skills doing that. And the entrepreneurial bug just never left. I started selling my services again out into the world as a programmer. And then I hired a couple of programmers. And so I built a programming company, which rolled into another company, which I became a partner for. And then that actually turned into a company that I founded and then built up from the ground up as the operations leader. I think that company was really the core of my learning as an entrepreneur. Before, I had just kind of done it haphazardly. So when I finally got to this company, we were doing really great work. We were building things that not a lot of people got to build. And so it got really serious for me, and building the operations of the company became really important.
So you'd mentioned before that you had reached a point in the business where things started to kind of become unwieldy, difficult to manage, and you were kind of in search of a little bit of structure and a framework. You'd told me off camera earlier that you're an absolute process nerd, and so maybe just talk a little bit about how you found EOS, how you implemented it, and how you became an implementer yourself.
Sure. So yeah, not going all the way back, but definitely starting in the middle there. I had grown myself out of what I think of as overwhelm these days. I had been the hub of the wheel. Technically, from a management standpoint, from a scheduling standpoint with our clients, and that became very, very taxing. And so I had to learn to, what I thought of at the time was duplicate myself, teach people the technical skills so that they could come in and do some of the work that I was doing, that I wasn't always on the other end of the phone when things got difficult for people. I had to really start getting outside of myself. That was really the first step in kind of that operational excellence that I was talking about, is that it was a step where I had to become intentional about my management, my leadership, and I couldn't just do anymore. And so, at that time, I had a 3-year-old, and I was working on actively clawing back my Sundays and my Saturdays and doing all that kind of stuff. As we got better, then I kind of hit the ceiling and things stopped. They stopped progressing, they stopped growing, they were still moving forward, but not at the same kind of rate. And so I started looking for answers, and I found EOS. I found that book, Traction. When I read it, it kind of blew my process and operational mind, because it's a system that's put together with very simple, practical tools that honestly, I thought, like, I know about all of these things, but why am I not doing these? And knowing what I know today, it's really the way that Gino Wickman, who created EOS, ordered all of the things in EOS, right? So all of the tools and the order that things go in is kind of the magic. So not knowing that, I convinced my business partner at the time to, let's implement this. This thing looks great. We could definitely use it. And so we started using the tools and, building our vision out and running level 10 meetings, if you've done any EOS. And it started to really make some changes for us. We started to not worry about things as much. And so, long story short, I became pretty addicted to simplifying things and making them easier to operate on inside of the business. And EOS continued to enable me with that stuff. We got more and more clear on things, and like a lot of partnerships, what ended up happening was we got clear enough that the two of us realized we weren't going in the same path, in the same direction. We really didn't want to go in the same direction. So we talked back and forth, and I ultimately decided to be the one that was going to step out of the business. I think of it as my first kid that went away to college. um, and like I stepped out of the business, and that's when I had to decide, okay, what am I going to do next? I have built all these skills up. It doesn't really feel like it's about technical skills anymore. It feels like it's about building teams and managing teams and doing these things. And so I started looking around, and I hadn't even realized that there was something called an EOS implementer until I got into a meeting with EOS, and I felt totally at home, like these are my people. They went through the core values, and it did their thing. And I thought, this is what I want to be doing. I want to be helping other entrepreneurs to not go through that kind of overwhelm that I did. And so I started doing that at the end of 2019. I have helped a ton of people in technology and construction and all kinds of service businesses. And I'm kind of addicted to the work because I get to help these teams, move forward and get more of what they want out of their business.
It's fascinating to me that so when I read Traction at the behest of our mutual friend Julie, I read the book and I thought to myself, yeah, this is actually a collection of all of the things that I should be doing. At first, I was like, I'm pretty skeptical about systems. Like here's a ready-made system for you. Just implement what I tell you to do, and you'll be great. Those things always scare me because it's one size fits all, so it fits nobody. And so I kind of had that. I went into reading this Traction book with that sense, and as I read the book, I'm like, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. I didn't even know that. Like that was a good idea from a different book, and now it's in this book too. And it was like, okay, I get this. So this was a collection of best practices for small businesses was basically what I came away with. And it for me, it was great to clarify the vision because I, like you, had a situation where I had some executives on my team who had a different vision for where this organization would go. So we had to agree to find our paths in different ways to make those things happen for ourselves. And now we have a very clear vision and a very clear path at Vertical Motion because of the things that we've done based on what's in the book Traction and the EOS model. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, so you and I are about the same age. We're Gen Xers. We're on the back nine now of our lives. We've been doing this thing for a minute. I wanted you to kind of just go back a little bit, and we didn't have YouTube when we were 20 somethings. And so you were a young entrepreneur who kind of figured it out. And for me, I didn't even understand entrepreneurship until I was 30 something. And because I just didn't have access to resources and I didn't have any kind of network that was entrepreneurial. So just maybe talk a little bit about what got you to decide to move in that direction versus going and just getting a corporate job?
Oh man. Well, first of all, when I was 10, that probably wasn't a thing, me getting a corporate job. But I've always been pretty independent. And I think that's something that always drew me to doing my own thing is I could make my own decisions and I could do as deep a research as I wanted to. I could create systems that worked for me and worked in the way that I wanted them to. Not from necessarily a control standpoint, but we all have opinions about how things should work. So I really liked that freedom, I guess. And so I was always drawn to that. I think you said this earlier about the Dewey Decimal System. We grew up with the Dewey Decimal System and not with YouTube, like you just mentioned. And I thought that if I had a phone number and a business card and a business license for the city that I was in, I was set. Like I was an entrepreneur. And that's all I really needed. And then I just went out and sold my service. It was just kind of like, it was more doing and intuition than anything else. When I started my audio video business, it was a completely different thing, right? There was a lot more planning to it. There was a lot more intention in we want to go after this market, and so we need these partners involved, and we should do these things from a business structure standpoint. And so I guess along the way, it got more and more and more sophisticated the more I knew. And then I had some great mentors along the way. Like I said, my mom was a very intuitive entrepreneur. I was always watching her. I was involved in her businesses. And then fast forwarding, when we started the audio video business, we had a great mentor that had gone through bankruptcy with their business before. He brought all of that experience into helping us to get going in a really meaningful way. I can't thank him enough for that kind of experience.
Yeah, bankruptcy is a dual-edged sword. Luckily, I've been able to avoid it, but I do have some incredibly intelligent and successful entrepreneur friends who have been through that. And on the other side of it, the way that my friend described it to me was it's like you're sick to your stomach and you really don't want to throw up, but then you feel better after you do. He said that it made sure that he never ate anything that made him sick again. And so, some hard lessons learned there. To have
Yeah.
that kind of mentorship, guidance is actually fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so mentors is probably the short answer. Along the way, meeting people and having great people around me, learning from them.
Yeah, and you mentioned that your mom was an entrepreneur, so it was not only just people that you knew, but it was in your family, in your household. It was kind of the culture that you were brought up in. And you'd mentioned that you were selling services. Actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about. I find that one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs or people who are considering becoming an entrepreneur, they're most concerned about, I don't know how to sell. I don't
Mm.
like sales. I don't like selling things. I stay away from sales. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like your perspective on sales and how important that is to successful entrepreneurship.
Well, what's funny about that is I've had a ton of head trash around. I don't like to sell, right? In my building this EOS practice, it's just about helping people. So I'm not actually out there trying to sell something to somebody that somebody doesn't want. I want to help people who want to be helped. And I think with selling services in particular, that's really what you're looking for. If we're going out into the world trying to convince people or manipulate them into something, and I think that's from any standpoint, right? Whether that's selling something or it could even be, your mechanic trying to convince you that, they fixed the thing that you don't feel like they fixed. Whatever that is, right? We're going into it with the wrong intention. We're not really going to help people. We're not going to
No.
retain them and keep long-term relationships. And so it's really for me about building those relationships, helping people get value, just staying in it for the long term. If they want to engage from a business standpoint, then, it comes, but you need to help first before you get anything back. And honestly, that's one of our core values in EOS. That's one of the things that, kind of was one of those hooks.
To me, sales is not necessarily an act of selling something. It's actually an act of making someone aware of a solution to their problem and then offering it to them for less value than they get
Mm.
from the solution, right? And so I'll give you an example that I use all the time. Imagine you see someone who's wandering in from the desert, somewhere like Henderson, Nevada, and they've been out in the desert for 3 days, and you have a flask of water on your hip. It feels like it's your duty to make that person aware of the flask. Now, obviously, you wouldn't charge them, but you would give them the water. But the point is that like if you have a skill or a gift or the ability to solve a problem, especially an expensive and difficult problem to solve, then you should tell the world about that. You should tell people who need that kind of solution. And, like that's one of the things that I find sometimes people get sales wrong. And I think what you said it perfect, which was that sales is really about intention. And if you have the right intentions, then you don't really feel like you're selling if you do it right. At least that's been my experience. When I was a business development manager in the defense industry a long, long time ago, I remember that it was easy for me to do that because I didn't sell anything. I just built relationships. The whole purpose of every meeting that I ever had with anyone in the government was to get another meeting and to continue to have meetings until they told me, hey, do you know how to solve this problem? And then I come back and say, yeah, here's how we can do it, how long it'll take, and how much it'll cost. And okay, we'll buy that. And then $1.5 billion later, I had put together a pretty decent career of just making people aware of solutions to problems that they had.
It's funny. I think specifically selling services, we tend to individually undervalue ourselves. You mentioned that I talked about being a process geek. I love process, but I've always taken it for granted that, well, everybody else loves process too. They're good at it. And, just like I'm good at it, everything's fine. But I think what we forget or what we don't know and we need to learn is that not everybody's the same as we are. And
Right.
so we all have different things to bring to the table. And just like your flask of water, if we're not offering that up, if we're not looking at what is the value that we can actually offer in this situation and bringing it to light, then we're not giving that person that drink of water that they may need.
Yeah, you said that so well. I want to double tap on that about the fact that we don't always understand the value that we have to offer the world, right? We undervalue things that we know how to do. And I see this all the time. I'm somebody who has a really hard time opening an email attachment. I don't love spreadsheets. I don't love long documents that are written by AI and I have to read through to figure out the gist of it. My gift is to move fast and to kind of be intuitive about the situation. I'm married to my business partner, Nicole. We've been together for almost 25 years now. And she's exactly the opposite. She loves a to-do list. She loves a process. She loves, like a checklist of things that she can check off. She loves the details. She's very specific and particular about doing things the right way because that's what the process says to do. I'm constantly dragging her up out of the weeds and she's constantly pulling me down out of the sky like a kite. And kind of like a rock and a kite, we kind of move along without flying off into space or sitting there, So I have found that each person has their own unique gifts and abilities. And like we actually take our clients through a 5-part psychometric assessment to really understand and do a deep dive on what you actually have to offer and why do you feel the way you do about your career or whatever it is that you're thinking about, right? And so, yeah, I love that like we always undervalue what we're good at. Like I'm intuitive. I can see the future. I can predict trends based on information that I have available to me today. And they tend to be pretty accurate, at least generally. And that's not what Nicole can do, but she can do a whole bunch of things that I can't, that require patience, tolerance, procedure, right?
Right. Yeah, she can probably tell us actually what your hit rate is on that. But but I mean, it's so funny with the assessments that you were just talking about. So I work with teams where you work with individuals. What's really interesting about doing assessments with teams, with groups of people, is that that's when it starts to come out that like I'm like this and Tom, you're like this, and somebody else is like this, and here's how the puzzle pieces actually fit together. I think it's a really beautiful thing to put words to that and help people to understand how their puzzle piece fits with other puzzle pieces. I've seen people look at each other and go, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's why." Or it actually take the pressure off of them because they felt like a burden in a certain situation, and whereas they might have just been the only person in the room that was wired like that, where there might have been a lot of Toms in the room or a lot of Jims in the room and then just one of the other.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Actually, a client that you and I both work with that I think you introduced to me initially, she's used the psychometric assessments that we use on individuals. She's used them to choose. And one of the things that I love to do is when there is a team and you can take these psychometric assessments and evaluate each person 5 different ways. You get a pretty holistic view of the team and where the gaps are, where the overlaps are, why there's going to be conflict in communication here and there. And All of those things really are kind of an important precursor to setting up your systems the way that you do with EOS specifically. But generally speaking, I just think we all have to recognize that we all have unique gifts, and understanding how they all work together in the team, making sure that people are wired for the role that you're going to put them in too, I think is really important.
Well, yeah, and doing that work, like having a team recognize if they have a gap. Typically, there is a gap somewhere, right? But understanding where that gap is, and that when we hit it, we need to really slow down and remind ourselves that there's nobody in the room to advocate in this way. So who's going to fill that in this time? Call it playing the devil's advocate or whatever role that may be, right? Who's going to fill that one in? Or sometimes I have teams where there's a tremendous amount of overlap. When there's a bunch of people that have overlap in certain ways, that can really amplify some of the thought patterns or the behaviors or whatever it may be. So they skew one way or the other. In that way, you might remind yourself, oh, hold on a second, we're going to need to dial this one back a little bit because we're all going to be on the same page and we're going to agree to it way too fast.
Yeah, yeah. And I have unfortunately built leadership teams like that before I understood that you really needed to have all of those different perspectives on the team in order to have a well-rounded and balanced view of things. I just wanted people who thought like me so we could go really, really
Right.
fast, straight into
Right.
a wall.
Yeah. The way that's I think we all get that way. Like, I don't think we think the same. We shouldn't be on the same team together, and really that's a superpower, right?
Yeah, that was one of the many mistakes that I made early in my entrepreneurial journey. My entrepreneurial journey was basically I was an individual contributor in a corporate environment. I hated it. And I just decided to go build a venture backed startup and raised millions of dollars and built a company of 50 employees and was a terrible, terrible CEO. I had no idea what I was doing. And actually, that's a question I wanted to ask you. If you could now, with all of the experience, the knowledge you have from the implementation of EOS in not just your business, but in several others that you've done this for now, what would you tell your younger self as an entrepreneur? What advice would you give to yourself maybe when you were in your 20s?
Keep going. To be really simple and honest about it, just keep going. I think as entrepreneurs, even though there are things that we don't do well, right? And we even kind of touched on bankruptcy. That's a common thing in the entrepreneurial community to talk about failures, right? Because we learn so much from failures. And then it's also very human to pull back or to stop, when you hit one of those failures. And so, yeah, if I had any advice for myself younger, I probably would have stayed an entrepreneur longer earlier, kept going with it, because I probably could have achieved the same thing that I did in going and working for companies.
Yeah, I love that. Keep going. And you said that we learn from mistakes. I think we learn from action. And sometimes that
Mm.
action works out and sometimes it doesn't. And so, like, I have pivoted my messaging entirely to focusing on you need to take action. And whether you succeed or fail doesn't matter. It's that you have to keep taking action. Many of us get stuck in these kind of spots where we're just gathering information and we're just
hmm
watching and learning. You keep going is kind of, another way of saying take action, see what happens, learn from that. Because like, even if you think about what agile methodology teaches, it teaches to fail fast and fail forward, because in agile, it teaches that you learn from action, or you learn through movement more than you learn sitting static and trying to stare at a problem and come up with the perfect solution to it.
Yeah, I think you said that really, really well. You're right. Take action. So the failures, you would have never had the failures had you not taken action. One of the things that I see with my clients is we'll get into a session and a bunch of people will start setting goals that are about planning something. And we can set goals to plan stuff forever and never take action to actually do it, or fail quickly, or figure out if this is even viable or if it's going to work. And I think you said that really, really well, and agreed. That's what I would mean to myself as well.
Well, we're coming up on time here. I want to dive more into EOS with you in maybe the next episode. I think that we can have a whole episode where we're just talking about what is EOS, the value that it brings, like some of the nuance around it. I think that would be fantastic. But for people who are curious about what EOS or Entrepreneur Operating System, what that means and what's that about, what's a great resource for them to go to? And after that resource, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Well, three things. So the first, the most classic way that I hear about it that you and I both learned about EOS is read the book Traction. The second way is, yep, absolutely. It will blow your mind. The second way is look on eosworldwide.com. That's a great resource to learn all about EOS. Or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share whatever I know with you.
And I'll make sure that all of those resources are down in the description of this video. A link to the book, a link to EOS Worldwide, and a link to Jim on LinkedIn. I encourage you, if you are somebody who is thinking about implementing EOS, or if you don't even know what that means, but you know that your business is a little unwieldy and you're craving a little bit of structure, process, organization as you grow, this is the place you want to find yourself, quite honestly. And Jim's a world-class implementer, so don't be afraid to reach out to him. Any last thoughts before we wrap up shop here, Jim?
This has been a lot of fun. I love talking about leadership. I have to say, I think the nugget that I'm taking from this is that I'm going to pivot my conversation about failure and just take action. I really love that. That's what I'm taking away from the conversation.
That's fantastic. I love that. So, Jim, my takeaway from this is that if you feel like you're losing control of your company, or you feel like your company is kind of taking control of you, there's a solution to that. And you're somebody who understands how to put that together. And I know that it has helped my business tremendously. But the takeaway is that if you're struggling with understanding how to grow a business, there are tools out there and some really good ones. And EOS is a system that actually takes most of those good tools, good practices, and puts them together. So that's my takeaway for today.
Awesome. Well, it was great talking with you, Tom.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. I'm excited for our next conversation, and that will be up in maybe a couple weeks or a month from now. But I'll leave it here. Thanks so much, Jim, for coming in. Really appreciate the time. And I will see you and everyone else out there in the next one.